Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Hello, San Francisco!
President Obama fills his campaign chest in California this week with several sold-out fundraisers. Meanwhile, the White House responds to criticism of the administration's environmental record and its federal budget plan. Advocates for domestic abuse victims mount a billboard near the Hall of Justice.
And we want to send this message loud and clear. Domestic violence is never a private matter.
Their target is embattled San Francisco Sheriff Ross Mirkarimi as his trial for domestic violence approaches.
How can you make climate progress from San Francisco when there's so much resistance coming out of Washington these days? I'm Craig Miller. I'll have a Climate Watch conversation with EPA Regional Administrator Jared Blumenfeld.
And on the 70th anniversary of the Japanese-American internment, memories of Manzanar.
We just had like a regular room with cots on there, and that was it.
Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight are Carla Marinucci, senior political writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, and Rachel Gordon, City Hall reporter, also with the Chronicle. Rachel, what kind of impact has this domestic violence case against the sheriff had on advocates for the victims?
It's really galvanized this community, really from the get-go. The thing that made them most angry was on his swearing-in day on January 8th, Ross Mirkarimi said that this case that's involving allegations that he was abusive to his wife, grabbed her arm, caused bruising on New Year's Eve. He addressed reporters on a swearing-in day and said, it's a private matter, it's a family matter. And that right there got people furious. So what we saw this week, as was mentioned in the intro, was that they raised more than $5,000 to put up a billboard in the south of Market, 4 blocks from the Hall of Justice, where Mirkarimi will be facing trial next week, that says domestic violence is never a private matter. They hope to raise a few more $1,000 to also put a Spanish language billboard up. They're saying that just that comment alone set the whole idea of domestic violence back a decade or two before law enforcement community took it seriously, before it was really something that there was supposed to be zero tolerance for. Ross Mirkarimi and his attorney at the time said, my comments were taken out of context. That wasn't what I meant. I was just talking about my family. Let my family deal with what we're dealing with. The family don't air all our dirty laundry. But they're saying you should never use those words. So in that sense, it's galvanized it. They've had protests at City Hall. They've been meeting with Mayor Ed Lee. They've been kind of keeping the drumbeat going on this. And as we said, the billboard was the latest.
And is this a large group or just a small group that got together to take this on?
There's something in the city in San Francisco called the Domestic Violence Consortium, and this brings together the people who do the shelters, who do advocacy work. And one of the interesting things is even San Francisco's jails have a very robust domestic violence program for the inmates to try to hold themselves accountable, make reparations, apologize to their victims, really work with them on there. So there are people involved in that as well who are in this consortium. I'd say there are a couple of dozen people who are at this billboard unveiling, but it's a very narrow sidewalk in the south of Market. But it is a strong group that's been around for a while, and they want to make sure that the message that people aren't complacent about domestic violence. And we have to remember these are crimes that happen largely behind closed doors. You don't know about it. It's not something that's not a street mugging or something.
And what's so interesting about this case is these are 2 very high-profile people. Ileana Lopez, an actress well-known in Venezuela, and of course Ross Mirkarimi, so well-known in San Francisco. First of all, why have there been so few supporters coming forward for Mercury. We've heard Art Agnos, but this is a guy who's been in public life a long time.
Right.
Not a lot of voices here.
That's an interesting question. So Mercury, before he was sheriff, was a member of the Board of Supervisors for 7 years, high profile. He did the plastic bag ban in San Francisco. He was also one of the founding members of the California Green Party, worked for Matt Gonzalez when he was running for mayor. So he has been around for a while, and there has been a lot of silence. And I think that's another thing that's making some of the victims advocates upset about it. Now, let's say very clearly from the get-go, he is innocent until proven guilty.
And there's been no trial.
He has said he is not guilty. He's pleaded not guilty to 3 misdemeanor charges involving this alleged incident. His wife, Eliana Lopez, has said publicly as well that her husband did not do it. So the only high-profile person we've seen, as you've said, who's come around is former Mayor Art Agnos. In fact, Mercury has a stay-away order from his wife, and he's spending some of his time with him. But it's a very difficult case for public officials. Very quickly, the mayor of San Francisco and the Board of Supervisors might be called upon at some point to judge his fate. They could try to remove him from office. So they legally should stay out of this.
The whole issue of domestic violence has risen to another level, and that is a big debate going on in Washington about the federal laws.
Right. I mean, this is very interesting. It's called the Violence Against Women Act, that was passed first time in 1992 when Bill Clinton was president. Always received a lot of bipartisan support. This gives federal money to help on things for domestic violence, for stalking, sexual assaults. It's everything for education, to help people find safe houses, rape kits. You could go down the list of things. Well, this time, just about a week ago, the Senate Judiciary Committee passed it out, but every Republican on that committee voted against it. Now, they say, look, we're not against helping victims of domestic violence. What they didn't like were 3 provisions in this. One, it had more programming for gays and lesbians. It's saying you cannot discriminate against gay and lesbian victims of domestic violence in your programs. It would increase the number of visas that are here for undocumented immigrants who might be victims of domestic violence, so they can stay in the country legally. And it also, for the first time, would give Indian tribes jurisdiction over non-Indians if there's domestic violence cases on their properties. So the Republicans said, who were against this, saying, if you take those out, we'll be fine with it. We'll go to the floor for a full Senate vote.
So
but
what's the final day to get something passed out?
That hasn't been announced yet when that's going to happen, but it looks like it will still probably pass. There is a Republican co-sponsor, Democrat co-sponsor. As I've said in the past, it's been on an almost unanimous vote, I believe. What's going to be interesting to see if there's going to be some movement in taking out some of these most controversial provisions.
Well, we'll stay with Washington and move with Washington via California in this case, though, talking about the president's visit here this week.
That's right.
One big, fast, fat fundraising day.
Yeah, absolutely right. You were there, Belva, at the Masonic Auditorium, where really the message this week was "Show me the money." That was Barack Obama's message to California. He picked up, $8 million on this fundraising trip. Just a lot, most of it in high dollar amounts. $35,000, $800 a plate in San Francisco for 2 different events. In one event, he only spent 10 minutes at speaking, actually, to the actual people. And the other event, they didn't get to hear Al Green and him do a duet. I mean,
Al Green was there to sing.
Al Green was there to sing, but I mean, you have to
we have to tell people what that's about.
Yeah, you have to give the big donors some love. That's what it was all about. But Obama also did a huge fundraiser at the Masonic. 3,000 people were there. You saw that one. And really the message for the president is going up and down California, repeating is, look, you wanted change in 2008. I haven't been able to give you everything you want, but who's more for the middle class? Who's more for the goals that, ending the wars, creating infrastructure, protecting the environment? That's what I'm for, and the Republicans are not going to get that done. That is his message in California.
Was he also campaigning for passage of his budget that is now?
Well, that was certainly part of the speeches that he gave. We saw him at the Masonic Auditorium talk about some of the goals, and the budget is a tough situation. And actually, that one went through this week. Not a lot of attention because there was a lot of back and forth in Washington over the payroll tax, and of course, Obama was out of town fundraising. But the fact is, there's some issues in the federal budget that are concerning to many people, including many progressives who are out there in front of the Nob Hill Masonic. Obama did a lot of things in San Francisco. He wasn't just there. He made some stops in Chinatown and other places too.
I just want to ask, when you talk about budget, I mean, we're going to talk about the campaign budget. I heard you also say that this is going to be a $1 billion, with a B, billion-dollar campaign for President of the United States.
That's what they're expecting to raise. I mean, we're talking about with these super PACs. And that is what Jay Carney, the White House press secretary, said on the way here. Look, they have got to raise a lot of money. The Republicans are doing it on their side. And now Obama has given his blessing to this as well, while originally complaining about it. The fact is, we don't know. He had an event with 20 high-profile people who paid $35,000. We don't know who those people were, and no reporters were allowed to sit in on those events.
There's been such a change in the way presidential candidates deal with the media. Media gets very little access. I was there. Most reporters got nowhere near the president.
That's absolutely right, Belva. You saw that, and I think it's very extraordinary. I've covered since Clinton, who used to come in San Francisco. Local reporters were always given access. Even Bush, I have to say, who never actually set foot in the city, did give access. The fact this trip was extraordinary. The president went to Chinatown. Local reporters were never told, and were not near him on those events and on those high-dollar fundraisers. No local reporters were allowed in. That really is extraordinary.
So I thought that was interesting in the Chinese restaurant, though. The patrons who were there, who didn't know the president was going to walk in there, they pulled out their smartphones and were taking the videos of it, which went viral on YouTube.
Absolutely
and went to
right.
the media thing. And it's like,
I think part of this is all of the candidates. This is the town where Obama always is confronted with protest hecklers. There's Code Pink, environmental groups. This is the place where he did the guns, people clinging to their guns and gods, etc.
But the environmental groups had sort of an upper hand there in terms of how they looked in demonstrating.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had people dressed as polar bears out in front. You saw them talking about drilling in the Arctic. You had the Code Pink people who interrupted his speech twice. This is a town where he always gets protests, and I think that's one of the reasons for the very tight press. I think they're afraid of one of those YouTube moments here.
Well, a little bit more on the president and the environment coming up, because that's part of the cuts that he's going to be making in this new budget proposal. You know, President Obama proposed this budget this week. It includes a $175 million cut to the Environmental Protection Agency. It is the third consecutive year that he's cut funds for the EPA. He did, however, propose a $66 million increase in spending for air quality programs and renewed his commitment to reduce greenhouse gases believed to be the main culprit for global warming. Last week, Climate Watch senior editor Craig Miller caught up with the original head of the EPA to talk about the agency's top priorities.
It's not every day you see a federal official hop astride a motorcycle at a press conference. Unless, of course, it's an electric motorcycle. And the photo op is at a California company seen as poster child for renewable energy and green jobs. This clean energy initiative is just one of many priorities Jared Blumenfeld juggles as administrator of the San Francisco-based Pacific Southwest region of the Environmental Protection Agency. Your boss, Lisa Jackson, the top administrator at EPA, was in town just recently. The two of you were touring a company that makes components for electric vehicles and talking about green jobs. This seems to be kind of part of a full court press since the State of the Union message to get out there and show that the EPA is a jobs generating machine as well as one that protects the environment. Is that just come with the territory now?
Where we are as a nation right now is at a time where we need jobs desperately, and we see the economy is growing slowly, but also a time where we need environmental protection. And so those two things do naturally come together. And the Bay Area, California, the West generally is a great place to be able to point to businesses like Mission Motors, and you can say they've gone from 40 employees today to 80 employees tomorrow as a result of standards that the EPA has come out with that require engines to be cleaner. If you're an innovative company that's really thinking about how to do things differently, to make money for your shareholders, to make your employees successful, and at the same time promote environmental values, we want to help you do that.
And I mentioned the State of the Union address in which the president used the word climate only one time, and it was only in the context of saying we're probably not going to see any legislation on it, or kind of a reality check. Last year, didn't use the word at all in the State of the Union message. Now, contrast to this building where I see posters all over the place with a list of your priorities, of EPA priorities, and the first one on the list is taking action on climate change. So how can you reconcile those two things?
Amazingly, despite the political climate that we find ourselves in, a huge amount has been done to combat climate change. So EPA, at first of the instruction of our Supreme Court in 2007, they said, EPA, you need to look at whether greenhouse gas emissions need to be regulated. We did that in 2009. We came out with an endangerment finding saying that greenhouse gases are an endangerment to public health and the environment, and that vehicles contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. We then came out with the largest 13 auto manufacturers and came out with rules that will save literally billions of barrels of oil from needing to be imported. Those rules are now being updated so that by 2025 will require every passenger vehicle get to 54.5 miles to the gallon. So significant leap forward.
Now, most of those initiatives you mentioned are national EPA initiatives. How can you, working from your lonely outpost here, in charge of one region of EPA, how can you try to affect change, real change and progress on the climate front? Again, you know, when the national environment is so difficult and when you've only got one piece of the puzzle here.
So we have a unique region. It stretches from Guam and American Samoa, Hawaii, California, Nevada, and Arizona. So all those places share abundant sunshine. Renewable energy has been a big focus of ours in this office. So something the EPA does is we clean up Superfund sites. We clean up sites that are contaminated. We're doing a map at the moment with the Department of Energy to overlay all those disturbed lands and grid interconnections so that we can prioritize putting solar really quickly without very much permitting on those sites. So that's one thing that we're doing.
One of the things you can do regionally to try to move the climate agenda, I guess, is to encourage localities, communities to engage in this smart growth concept. How's that working?
EPA has been a champion of smart growth from the beginning and really working with communities at the community local level to say, how do you design a place like San Francisco, which is very dense, it's walkable, it's got public transportation, you don't need to own a car, you can bicycle around, and that reduces greenhouse gas emissions a great deal. There's also other smart design features, green infrastructure, so things like low impact development. So rather than having water go through a wastewater treatment system, it percolates through the cement, through the soil, back out into the bay. So thinking about smarter ways of designing cities and communities that more mimic natural systems and also allow people to get out of their car is something that we need to continue pushing, because if you look at the real estate market over the last 3 years, it's actually fascinating. Smart growth has really been fairly robust in an economy where the sprawl is now in foreclosure. But EPA's biggest challenge, really, I think, even around the country, is how we get the San Joaquin Valley and the LA Basin into attainment of the Clean Air Act for both ozone and fine, very fine particulate matter. It's actually finer than a human hair, but has very serious respiratory and other consequences. The biggest issue really with climate change is people don't understand how it fits into their daily lives. So one of the opportunities that we have here in California with the non-attainment of the Clean Air Act is to show people that by getting rid of an old diesel locomotive, by getting rid of an old diesel truck or tractor and replacing it with a cleaner technology, we help the environment, we help get into attainment, and we help them save money.
Jared, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Well, February 19th marks the 70th anniversary of the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. A doctor who was interned at Manzanar, its relocation center, shares vivid memories of her time in the camp.
Silhouetted against the backdrop of the snow-capped eastern Sierras in Southern California, guard towers and military police gates still bear silent witness to one of the darkest chapters in American history. The only thing that seems to move freely is the offering of origami cranes that dance in the wind at the monument in the cemetery at Manzanar. It's hard to imagine a more desolate place, freezing in the winter, with heart-stopping heat in the summer, and sandstorms that could drop you to your knees. Manzanar was one of 10 Japanese-American internment camps that were built during World War II, following the outbreak of war with Japan on December 7, 1941. In the panic that followed Pearl Harbor, Japanese-American citizens were rounded up and sent to what amounted to prison camps for the duration of the war. The internment camp at Manzanar has been turned into a National Historic Site.
When people first came here, the barracks were just barely completed, if they were complete. So, you had bare wood floors, no linoleum or wallboard or anything like that. Starting in the summer of 1942, they started putting down linoleum and putting in wallboard. So the barracks did change a little bit. Still, they were never insulated. They had a single hanging light bulb. They had an electrical socket. There was no plumbing indoors. The faucets were outside. People ate in a mess hall 3 times a day, and there were communal latrines and showers separated for men and women.
At age 95, Dr. Masako Miura knows a great deal about the history of Manzanar. Her entire family was interned at the camp, and she herself was one of the few physicians who could offer medical help to the people who were held behind the barbed wire.
They recruited 5 doctors for Manzanar, and they had 10,000 people in there.
Born and raised in Pasadena with her sisters, Dr. Miura has had what can best be described as a remarkable journey. Masako was just like any other young woman growing up in Los Angeles in the 1930s. She graduated from Hollywood High School, where she was an excellent student. She would go on to graduate from the University of Southern California in 1937, and just as impressively, she went on to USC Medical School, where she was only one of 2 women in her class of 1941. Masako was 6 months into her residency and working at LA County Hospital when the Empire of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
Well, we were kind of surprised because we didn't think anything that Japan would attack like that, and we thought, gee, what are we supposed to do, because we were right in the middle, and we thought, oh my, we didn't know what to do, actually.
In the hysteria that followed, President Franklin Roosevelt authorized Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. Japanese nationals and Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated. More than 110,000 people were sent to what were called war relocation camps. Masako's father was picked up the very first day because he had donated small amounts of money to the wife of a doctor who had run a Japanese tea house.
I think she had a little black book, so she took out donations from all the people in Little Tokyo. And when the war broke out, everybody listed in this black book were all picked up by the FBI and stuck in the internment camp right away.
Recently married to another Japanese-American doctor, Masako was recruited to serve as a physician at Manzanar. Since she knew her family was to be sent to the same relocation camp, she agreed to serve as a doctor. However, she wasn't prepared for the living conditions or what passed for a hospital.
We just had like a regular room with cots on there, and that was it. And army blankets. And then, of course, at that time we had no facilities, medical facilities at all. All we had was a hot plate, a wash basin, and a few syringes and needles that we would boil.
Life in the camps was hard, especially for the women. The shame and embarrassment was almost intolerable, and it was Masako who spoke out first.
No privacy at all. And I said, look, you've got to put partition in or curtains so that people have a little more privacy, especially the women need it. And so finally they got around to it, but it took a long while before I could, convince him to do it.
Masako would spend a year at Manzanar and then go on to serve as a doctor at the camp in Utah at Topaz until the end of the war. She would go on to raise a family and return to her career in medicine. Despite everything she witnessed and experienced, she's not bitter. She moved on with her life.
I think it's a matter of keeping contact with everybody, and and if people know how you feel, and and if you get along with people, I think you do a lot better. But if you stay isolated, I think that's the worst thing you could do.
Well, that segment was part of the KQED Plus This Is Us series. You'll find a link at kqed.org/thisweek. Well, my thanks to both of you for joining us here tonight. And next week, we talk with the head of the state's Republican Party. We close tonight with concert footage of Warren Hellman, the San Francisco philanthropist who founded the Hartley Strictly Bluegrass Festival, and the Hellman Family Foundation is a KQED donor. Hellman passed away in December. On Sunday, February 19th, there will be a free concert in front of the Beach Chalet at Ocean Beach in celebration of his life. Here's Hellman performing with his band, the Wranglers, in 2010. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.
Funding for Climate Watch on This Week in Northern California is provided by the Mary Van Voorhees Fund and the Follis Family Fund.